The bridge of the hegemony dreadnought, Inevitable Conquest, hummed with the subdued efficiency that had terrorized 1,000 worlds. Commander Zekthara stood before the primary viewing screen, his forearms clasped behind his back in the traditional pose of a Kethmari warrior philosopher. His chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the harsh bridge lighting, each battle scar a testament to 3 decades of systematic galactic conquest. The third planet of this unremarkable yellow star system hung before them like a blue-green jewel, completely unaware that its fate had already been decided by beings whose existence it couldn't even comprehend. Intelligence reports indicated a young species barely past their industrial age, with primitive chemical rockets and nuclear weapons that wouldn't even scratch the paint on a hegemony scout vessel. "Status report," Zekthara commanded, his translator rendering his chittering voice into the standardized hegemony tongue. Sub-Commander Veltar, a thin saurian with nervous yellow eyes, consulted his data tablet. "Initial scans confirm the intelligence reports, Commander. The inhabitants call themselves humans, and their planet Earth. Population approximately 8 billion, scattered across 7 major land masses. Technology level consistent with a Class 7 civilization. No evidence of faster-than-light capability, energy shields, or particle weapons." Zekthara's mandibles clicked in what his species considered amusement. Another primitive world, another easy conquest. The hegemony's expansion had been unstoppable precisely because they understood the fundamental truth of the universe. Strength conquered weakness, intelligence dominated ignorance, and superior technology crushed inferior races beneath its boots. "Begin standard first contact protocol," he ordered. "Deploy stealth observation pods to major population centers. I want complete behavioral analysis, military capability assessment, and cultural weakness identification within 72 standard hours." The first anomaly appeared 18 hours later. Zekthara was reviewing tactical deployments when Communications Officer Rilnex, a many-tentacled cephalopod, approached with what appeared to be confusion written across her chromatic skin patterns. "Commander, we're receiving some unusual data from Observation Pod 77 Alpha."
"Define unusual," Zekthara replied without looking up from his strategic displays.
The pod was monitoring a human transportation route when a mechanical failure occurred in one of their primitive ground vehicles. The initial scans suggested a routine observation opportunity, human emergency response protocols, group behavioral dynamics under stress, that sort of standard intelligence gathering. Zekthara finally looked up. In 30 years of conquest, he had learned that when intelligence officers used words like unusual in that particular tone, it meant something had happened that didn't fit into their neat analytical categories. "Show me." The main screen shifted to display the feed from Observation Pod 77 Alpha. The image showed what appeared to be a primitive human settlement with their characteristic rectangular dwellings and crude paved pathways. A large, boxy vehicle had somehow overturned, pinning what appeared to be a juvenile human beneath its considerable mass. "Standard accident scenario," Zekthara noted. "The humans will likely use mechanical lifting devices or call for assistance from their emergency response teams." "What's unusual about this?" Rilnex's skin patterns shifted to deeper purples, the cephalopod equivalent of profound confusion. "Watch what happens next, Commander." On screen, an adult human female approached the overturned vehicle. According to the data scrolling beside the image, she weighed approximately 60 kilograms and stood roughly 1.7 meters tall. The vehicle pinning the juvenile was listed at over 2,000 kilograms of solid metal and mechanical components. The human female grabbed the edge of the vehicle with her bare appendages and lifted. The massive transport rose into the air as if it weighed no more than a piece of paper. The trapped juvenile scrambled free, and only then did the female release her grip, allowing the vehicle to crash back down onto the pavement with a thunderous impact that the observation pod sensors registered from 3 kilometers away. Silence filled the bridge of the inevitable conquest. "Replay that sequence," Zekthara ordered, his voice unusually quiet. They watched it again. The fragile human lifting an impossible weight through what appeared to be sheer force of will. "Sensor malfunction," announced Weapons Officer Korthak, a hulking Ursoid whose species valued logic above all else. No biological entity of that size and apparent muscle mass could generate sufficient force to move an object of that weight. "The observation pod sensors must be miscalibrated. Run full diagnostic on Pod 77 Alpha," Zekthara commanded. "I want every sensor, every calibration, every data stream verified." 20 minutes later, Rilnex returned with results that made her skin patterns cycle through confused spirals. "All systems functioning perfectly, Commander. Sensors are calibrated to hegemony standard with zero margin for error. The readings are accurate. Then explain to me how a creature that weighs less than my left arm just lifted an object that would challenge a powered exoskeleton. I cannot, Commander. According to our understanding of biology, physics, and rational science, what we just observed is impossible. Zegtara stared at the screen, watching the replay for the 7th time. In his 3 decades of conquest, he had encountered species with natural exoskeletons, creatures with acid breath, beings that could survive in hard vacuum, and even a race that could briefly manipulate localized gravity. But all of those abilities made sense within the framework of evolution and biology. They were adaptations that served logical purposes and operated within understood physical laws. This was different. This suggested that humans could somehow transcend their apparent biological limitations through mechanisms that defied rational analysis. Expand observation coverage, he finally ordered. Deploy additional pods to monitor human emergency situations, particularly those involving physical stress or threat to offspring. I want to understand what we're dealing with. Over the next 48 hours, the reports began flooding in with increasing frequency and impossibility. Observation Pod 12 Gamma recorded a human male running into a burning structure and emerging with 3 unconscious individuals, his speed and endurance levels far exceeding what his muscle mass and respiratory system should have supported. Pod 15 Delta captured footage of a human female swimming against ocean currents that should have been impossible for her to navigate, all while carrying an injured companion. Most disturbing of all was the recording from Pod 22 Epsilon, which showed a group of humans working together to prevent their primitive aircraft from crashing. By all calculations, the aircraft was too damaged to remain airborne and too heavy for human strength to influence. Yet somehow, through a combination of impossible individual effort and incomprehensible group coordination, they had guided the failing machine to a safe landing that saved hundreds of lives. Sub-Commander Veltar approached with obvious reluctance. The analysis teams are requesting permission to expand their theoretical frameworks. Current understanding of biological limitations appears to be inadequate for explaining human capabilities. Zegtara had spent 3 days studying the data, cross-referencing it with every known species in the hegemony's vast databases, consulting with the finest scientific minds aboard his vessel. Nothing in their accumulated knowledge could explain what they were observing. What is the analysis team's hypothesis? They believe humans possess some form of latent capability that activates under extreme stress conditions, possibly an evolutionary adaptation to their planet's particular environmental challenges, or perhaps a form of directed biological enhancement that their primitive science has not yet learned to control consciously. And what do the tactical assessment teams recommend? Veltar's reptilian features displayed what his species considered deep concern. They recommend extreme caution, Commander. If humans can exceed their apparent physical limitations by unknown factors and through unknown mechanisms, our standard conquest protocols may require significant modification. Zegtara turned back to the viewing screen, where Earth continued its slow rotation, blissfully unaware of the watchers in the darkness beyond its atmosphere. For the first time in his long military career, he felt something that had been entirely absent from his previous conquests: uncertainty. The hegemony's power rested on superior technology and absolute understanding of their enemy's capabilities. They conquered through overwhelming force applied with surgical precision, striking at exactly the right moment with exactly the right amount of power to crush resistance before it could organize. But how do you calculate overwhelming force when you don't understand the true capabilities of your opponent? How do you plan surgical strikes against a species that might possess hidden abilities that defy rational analysis? Maintain observation protocols, he ordered. But prepare the fleet for extended analysis period. I want to understand these humans before we make any direct contact. As the bridge crew dispersed to carry out his orders, Zegtara remained at the viewing screen, staring at the blue planet that had just become the first world in 30 years to give him pause. Somewhere down there, fragile creatures were routinely accomplishing impossible feats through mechanisms that challenged everything the hegemony thought they knew about biology, physics, and the fundamental nature of sentient life. And for the first time since beginning his military career, Commander Zegtara wondered if perhaps the hegemony's understanding of the universe was not quite as complete as they had always assumed. The thought was deeply troubling, but not nearly as troubling as the growing suspicion that they were about to encounter something far more dangerous than superior technology or overwhelming numbers. They were about to encounter something that didn't follow the rules at all. 2 weeks into the observation mission, Zegtara had requisitioned 3 additional science vessels and reassigned his best analytical teams to the growing mountain of inexplicable data streaming in from Earth. What had begun as routine pre-conquest intelligence gathering had transformed into something approaching an existential crisis for the hegemony's understanding of sentient life itself. Dr. Thessara, the fleet's chief xenobiologist, stood before the assembled senior staff with an expression that her crystalline features could barely contain. Her species was renowned throughout the galaxy for their logical minds and unshakable commitment to scientific method, which made her current state of frustrated confusion all the more remarkable. Commanders, after extensive analysis of over 300 recorded incidents, I must report that human capabilities appear to violate several fundamental laws of biology and physics that we previously considered immutable. She gestured to the holographic display, which showed a human male suspended in the water of their planet's ocean. This individual was recorded swimming continuously for 14 hours while supporting 3 injured companions. Based on his body mass, muscle definition, and estimated caloric reserves, he should have exhausted himself after approximately 90 minutes of such exertion. Yet, somehow, his body continued functioning at peak efficiency for nearly 15 times longer than should have been possible. Weapons Officer Korth Kathak leaned forward, his massive Ursoid frame creaking the reinforced chair beneath him. Equipment malfunction, sensor error. There has to be a rational explanation. We verified every sensor, recalibrated every instrument, and cross-referenced every measurement. Dr. Thessara replied with crystalline patience. The data is accurate. Humans regularly exceed their apparent biological limitations by factors that range from impossible to completely absurd. She manipulated the display to show another scene, a human female running through a dense forest while carrying what appeared to be an unconscious male of her species.
This individual covered 27 kilometers of rough terrain while bearing an additional 70-kilogram load.
Her cardiovascular system should have failed after the first kilometer. Her musculature should have given out after the second. Her skeletal structure should have suffered stress fractures after the fifth. Yet she completed the journey, Sub-Commander Veltar observed unnecessarily. Not only completed it, the doctor continued, but showed no significant signs of fatigue upon arrival. Her heart rate, breathing pattern, and stress indicators were all within normal ranges for her species, as if the laws of thermodynamics had simply decided not to apply. Zektara had been studying similar reports for days, each one more impossible than the last. Humans lifting vehicles, running impossible distances, surviving environmental conditions that should have killed them, performing feats of endurance and strength that challenged everything the hegemony knew about biological limitations. What's your hypothesis, Doctor? I have 17 different hypotheses, Commander, and every single one of them requires us to fundamentally restructure our understanding of how biological systems function. Her crystalline form shifted through frustrated color patterns. The most conservative explanation suggests that humans possess some form of emergency metabolic override system that allows them to temporarily access energy reserves and physical capabilities normally locked away from conscious use. And the least conservative explanation? That they somehow had the ability to selectively ignore physical laws when sufficiently motivated. Silence settled over the briefing room, like a heavy blanket. The second explanation was so far outside the realm of established science that even considering it felt like intellectual heresy.
There's something else? Dr. Thessara continued reluctantly. The incidents appear to be triggered primarily by threats to other humans, particularly juvenile members of their species or individuals they maintain social bonds with.
The phenomenon seems to be fundamentally altruistic in nature. Communications Officer Rilnex's tentacles writhed in patterns that suggested deep concern. Commander, we've been monitoring their global communication networks, and we've discovered something else unusual about their social structures. The main display shifted to show streams of data flowing across multiple screens. Humans regularly share stories about these impossible feats. They call them heroic acts and use them to inspire others of their species. They don't seem to view these capabilities as supernatural or extraordinary. They consider them normal expressions of what they term human spirit, or the power of love and determination. Zakthara's mandibles clicked slowly. You're suggesting that they don't even realize they're doing something impossible? That appears to be correct, Commander. From their perspective, these feats are simply what any decent member of their species should be capable of, when circumstances demand it. The implications were staggering. Throughout the galaxy, species that possessed unusual capabilities understood them, studied them, and developed them into conscious tools. Telepathic races trained their mental abilities. Shapeshifters practiced their transformations. Energy manipulators learned to focus their power. But humans seemed to possess extraordinary abilities that they couldn't consciously access, didn't understand, and regarded as perfectly normal expressions of emotional commitment rather than supernatural powers. I want direct observation, Zekthara decided. Deploy infiltration pods. I need to understand how their society functions when they don't even realize they're routinely accomplishing impossible things. 3 days later, the infiltration data began arriving, and it painted a picture that was somehow even more disturbing than the individual incidents of impossible physical feats. Human society appeared to be built around the assumption that ordinary individuals would regularly transcend their limitations when circumstances demanded it. Their stories, their cultural myths, their historical records, and their entertainment media were all filled with examples of people accomplishing impossible things through determination, love, and sacrifice. They had legends of individuals fighting entire armies single-handedly to protect their communities. They told stories of people surviving unsurvivable conditions through pure stubbornness. They celebrated historical figures who had accomplished things that should have been physically impossible, but were regarded as natural expressions of human courage and dedication. Most unsettling of all, they seemed to expect these impossible feats from each other. Human parents routinely told their offspring that they could accomplish anything if they tried hard enough and cared deeply enough. Human leaders regularly called upon their people to exceed their limitations for the greater good. Human communities consistently relied on the assumption that when crisis struck, ordinary people would find ways to do extraordinary things. It's as if their entire civilization is based on the premise that the impossible is merely difficult, reported social analysis specialist Quindar, a normally unflappable insectoid whose compound eyes were flickering with patterns of disbelief. They structure their societies around the expectation that biological limitations are guidelines rather than absolute boundaries. Show me their military capabilities, Zekthara ordered. The data that followed was simultaneously reassuring and terrifying. Human military technology was indeed primitive by hegemony standards. Their weapons were chemical-based, their vehicles required external fuel sources, and their protective equipment would be useless against even basic energy weapons. But their military history told a different story. Soldiers fighting for days without sleep, food, or adequate shelter. Individual warriors holding positions against impossible odds. Military units accomplishing objectives that should have required 10 times their numbers. Entire armies functioning effectively under conditions that should have rendered them combat ineffective within hours. Their military doctrine appears to be based on the assumption that individual soldiers will regularly exceed their apparent physical and psychological limitations when properly motivated, reported Chief Military Analyst Bextor. They don't plan around the realistic capabilities of their troops. They plan around the assumption that their troops will somehow find ways to exceed those capabilities when necessary. And does this assumption prove accurate? Disturbingly often, yes. Their military history is filled with examples of forces accomplishing objectives that our tactical computers classify as impossible given their apparent resources and capabilities. Zekthara spent the next several hours reviewing specific battles from human history. Time and again, he found examples of small forces defeating larger ones, soldiers enduring conditions that should have been lethal, and military units functioning effectively despite losing most of their equipment and supplies. By conventional military analysis, humans should have been conquered dozens of times throughout their history by better-equipped neighbors. Instead, they had consistently found ways to overcome superior numbers and technology through what appeared to be pure determination and creativity. Commander. Sub-Commander Veltar approached with obvious reluctance. The tactical assessment teams have completed their preliminary conquest scenario analysis. Report. They recommend indefinite postponement of military action against Earth. The briefing room fell silent. In the entire history of the hegemony, the military had never recommended postponing conquest of a technologically inferior species. Explain. Standard hegemony conquest doctrine relies on predictable enemy capabilities and rational response patterns. We deploy overwhelming force at strategic points, eliminate key leadership and infrastructure, and accept surrender from the remaining population once they realize resistance is futile. Veltar's reptilian features showed distinct signs of stress. However, humans appear to respond to overwhelming odds by accessing capabilities they shouldn't possess and accomplishing objectives they shouldn't be able to achieve. Our tactical computers cannot generate reliable conquest scenarios when the enemy might spontaneously exceed their apparent limitations by unknown factors. You're telling me that our entire military can't figure out how to conquer a species that doesn't even have energy weapons? I'm telling you that we can't figure out how to conquer a species that doesn't follow the rules, Commander. How do you plan for victory when your enemy might suddenly become capable of impossible things at the exact moment when defeat seems certain? Zekthara looked around the briefing room at his senior staff, beings from a dozen different species, representing the finest military and scientific minds in the hegemony. All of them shared the same expression of frustrated confusion. For 3 decades, conquest had been a matter of simple mathematics. Superior technology plus overwhelming force equaled inevitable victory. The formula had never failed, but mathematics broke down when one side of the equation refused to behave according to mathematical principles. "Continue observation," he ordered finally. "I want to understand these humans before we make any decisions." And send a coded message to Hegemony Command. Tell them we may need to reconsider our entire approach to this system. As his staff dispersed to carry out orders, Zekthara remained alone, staring at the tactical displays that showed Earth's peaceful rotation. Somewhere down there, 8 billion humans were going about their daily lives, completely unaware that they had just accomplished something no other species in known history had managed. They had made the hegemony afraid to attack them, and they had done it without even realizing they were defending themselves. The emergency klaxon aboard the inevitable Conquest had never sounded during observation missions. Commander Zekthara arrived at the bridge to find his crew in a state of controlled chaos, with multiple displays showing what appeared to be a large asteroid on a collision course with Earth. "Report," he commanded, settling into his command position. "Commander, long-range sensors detected a rogue asteroid approximately 40 minutes ago," Sub-Commander Veltar reported, his usually steady voice carrying an edge of excitement. "Mass approximately 2 billion tons. Trajectory placing it on direct collision course with Earth's primary landmass. Impact in approximately 14 standard hours." Zekthara studied the tactical display with growing interest. The asteroid was substantial enough to cause significant damage to Earth's biosphere, potentially eliminating a large percentage of the human population and certainly disrupting their primitive civilization beyond recovery. "This presents an unusual opportunity," he mused aloud. "We can observe how humans respond to an extinction-level threat that they cannot possibly overcome through individual heroics or impossible feats of strength." "Precisely, Commander," agreed Dr. Thesara, who had been summoned to the bridge along with the other department heads. "No amount of human determination can alter the trajectory of a 2-billion-ton asteroid. This will allow us to observe their true capabilities when faced with an absolutely insurmountable challenge. Deploy all available observation pods," Zekthara ordered. "I want complete coverage of their response. Finally, we'll see what happens when humans encounter a problem that can't be solved by exceeding their biological limitations." The first signs of human awareness appeared 3 hours later, when their primitive radio telescopes detected the incoming asteroid. Within minutes, their global communication networks exploded with activity as the news spread across their planet. "How are they responding?" Zekthara asked. Communications Officer Rilnex's tentacles were flickering through rapid patterns as she processed the incoming data streams. "Commander, the response is not what we expected." "Elaborate." "Rather than engaging in the panic, despair, or resignation that our psychological models predicted, humans appear to be organizing. Every major nation on Earth has redirected their space programs toward the crisis. They're sharing technical data, pooling resources, and coordinating response efforts." "Primitive reaction," commented Weapons Officer Korthak. "They lack the technology to meaningfully alter an asteroid of that size. They'll waste their few remaining hours on futile gesture." But as the hours passed, the human response began to take on characteristics that were familiar, yet somehow more disturbing than their individual feats of impossible strength and endurance. They weren't just sharing resources, they were sharing them at a rate and scale that defied their established political and economic structures. Nations that had been in conflict for decades immediately ceased hostilities and began coordinating their efforts. Competing space agencies began sharing decades of closely guarded technical secrets. Private corporations opened their research facilities and manufacturing capabilities to competitors without negotiation or compensation. "Commander," reported social analysis specialist Quinder, "human cooperation appears to be operating outside their normal behavioral parameters. They're sharing resources and information at a rate that our models suggest should be impossible given their established social hierarchies and competitive economic structures." "Show me their space capabilities," Zekthara ordered. The data was depressingly primitive. Humans had barely mastered chemical rocket propulsion. Their largest spacecraft could carry perhaps a dozen individuals to their nearest celestial neighbor. Their most powerful weapons were fusion-based devices that could devastate their own cities but wouldn't even scratch the surface of an asteroid. By any rational analysis, humanity's situation was hopeless, which was precisely what made the next 12 hours so profoundly disturbing. Rather than accepting inevitable defeat, humans began implementing a plan that was technically impossible given their available resources. They started by stripping their military forces of every rocket, missile, and explosive device capable of reaching space. Then they began retrofitting civilian spacecraft with cargo pods filled with nuclear devices. They're going to attempt to destroy the asteroid with nuclear weapons, observed Dr. Dane. Thisara. Admirable determination, but completely futile. The energy required to significantly alter the asteroid's trajectory exceeds their total nuclear arsenal by several orders of magnitude. But the humans weren't finished. As their space agencies worked to deploy nuclear devices, their ground-based facilities began coordinating a different approach. Every nation on Earth started repositioning their largest industrial equipment towards specific geographic coordinates. Massive construction machines, mining equipment, and manufacturing facilities were being transported to precise locations across multiple continents. "What are they doing?" Zektara asked, studying the movement patterns with growing confusion. "Unknown, Commander," replied Quindar. "The coordination appears to be based on calculations that our computers cannot replicate using their apparent technological capabilities. They're positioning equipment according to mathematical models that should be beyond their computational resources." The human plan began to reveal itself in the final 6 hours. While their nuclear-armed spacecraft approached the asteroid, ground-based facilities were creating what appeared to be a massive synchronized industrial effort. Mining operations began precisely timed excavations. Construction equipment started building structures that served no apparent purpose. Manufacturing facilities began producing components according to specifications that made no rational sense. And then, with 4 hours remaining until impact, the impossible began to happen. The nuclear detonations around the asteroid were precisely coordinated to create a series of directed explosions that began altering its trajectory, not by the tiny amount that their nuclear arsenal should have achieved, but by a significant margin that suggested the humans had somehow found a way to multiply the effective force of their weapons. "How is that possible?" demanded Korthak. Dr. Thisara was studying the sensor readings with evident disbelief. "The nuclear detonations appear to be creating resonance effects that are amplifying their impact on the asteroid's structure. But the level of precision required for such coordination should be beyond their computational and communication capabilities." Meanwhile, on Earth's surface, the coordinated industrial effort was creating what could only be described as artificial earthquakes. Perfectly timed, precisely located, mathematically coordinated seismic events that were somehow working in harmony with the asteroid deflection effort. They're using their planet's rotation and gravitational field as part of the deflection equation, announced Navigation Officer Lineth with awe in her synthesized voice. They're turning their entire world into a component of their defensive system. That level of coordination would require computational resources that they simply don't possess, protested Dr. Thessera. The mathematical models alone would challenge our most advanced systems. But the evidence was undeniable. Across 8 billion humans, individuals, and organizations were performing precisely calculated tasks with split-second timing, contributing to a planetary defense effort that was somehow managing to alter the trajectory of a 2-billion-ton asteroid. "Commander," Subcommander Veltar reported with obvious amazement, "the asteroid is going to miss Earth by approximately 40,000 kilometers." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of ship systems and the soft clicking of Zekthara's mandibles as he processed what they had just witnessed. "Replay the entire sequence," he ordered. For the next 3 hours, they watched humanity save their own world through a combination of primitive technology, impossible coordination, and what could only be described as collective determination that transcended rational limits. 8 billion individuals had somehow functioned as a single organism, each performing precisely the right task at exactly the right moment to accomplish something that should have been absolutely impossible. "Analysis," Zekthara commanded when the replay concluded. "Commander, Doctor," Thessara began slowly, "what we just observed suggests that humans don't just possess individual abilities that exceed their apparent limitations. They appear to possess collective capabilities that allow them to function as a unified organism when faced with sufficient threat. The coordination required for their success should have taken years of planning and computational resources that exceed their apparent technological level," added Quindar. "Yet they accomplished it in less than 14 hours using nothing but their existing communication networks and what appears to be intuitive cooperation. Furthermore," continued Navigation Officer Lineth, "their solution required them to treat their entire planet as a single tool, while simultaneously coordinating the efforts of billions of individuals. The mental frameworks necessary for such thinking are impossible." Korth Ak finished. By every measure we have for evaluating intelligence and social organization, what we just observed cannot happen. Zekthara stood before the main viewing screen, watching Earth continue its peaceful rotation as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Down there, humans were probably already returning to their normal lives, completely unaware that they had just demonstrated capabilities that challenged the hegemony's understanding of intelligence, society. Recommendations? He asked. Immediate withdrawal to minimum safe distance, suggested Veltar. If humans can coordinate planetary defense efforts in real time using primitive communication systems, we cannot predict their response to direct military threat. I concur, agreed Dr. Thessara. We're dealing with a species that appears to possess collective intelligence capabilities that emerge only under extreme stress. Our presence might trigger defensive responses that we cannot anticipate or counter. Sir, Communications Officer Rilnax interrupted. We're receiving a transmission from Earth. It's being broadcast on multiple frequencies in what appears to be a mathematical language. Contents? It's a simple message, Commander. Translated, it says, "We know you're watching. We're not ready to talk yet, but we will be soon. Please be patient." The silence on the bridge stretched for nearly a full minute. They know we're here, Veltar stated unnecessarily. Not only do they know we're here, Zekthara replied slowly, they've known all along. The asteroid crisis was probably the first situation that required them to demonstrate their true capabilities openly. Are you suggesting they've been hiding their abilities? I'm suggesting that we've been observing a species that's been carefully managing what we were allowed to see. Until today, when they had no choice but to reveal that their individual impossible feats are just the beginning of what they're actually capable of. Zekthara turned away from the viewing screen and walked toward his command position. For the first time in his military career, he was facing a species that had outmaneuvered him without firing a shot, without revealing their true strength, and without even acknowledging his presence. Set course for the outer system, he ordered. Maintain observation distance, but prepare for immediate withdrawal if they demonstrate any additional capabilities. Should we contact Hegemony Command, sir? Yes. Tell them we may need to completely reconsider our approach to the third planet, and tell them that conquest may not be an option. Why not, Commander? Zekthara settled into his command chair and watched Earth shrink on the main display as they moved to a safer distance. Because you can't conquer a species that's better at warfare than you are, even when they're pretending to be primitive. 3 months after the asteroid incident, Commander Zekthara had established what the hegemony's military manuals would classify as an observation post in the outer reaches of Earth's solar system. The inevitable conquest maintained position beyond the orbit of their outermost planet, accompanied by 2 science vessels and a communications array that kept constant watch over the mysterious species that had begun to fundamentally challenge everything the hegemony thought they understood about intelligence, technology, and warfare. The humans had kept their promise about eventual contact. 2 weeks after the asteroid deflection, they had begun broadcasting structured mathematical communications on frequencies specifically designed to reach Zekthara's position. The messages were simple at first, basic mathematical concepts, physical constants, and what appeared to be friendly greetings. But as the communications continued, they revealed a level of scientific sophistication that was completely at odds with humanity's apparent technological level.
Commander, Dr. Pregnantessalo,
Thessara announced as she entered his ready room. I need to show you the latest transmission from Earth. The holographic display activated, showing complex mathematical formulas that scrolled past at a rate that challenged even Zekthara's enhanced cognitive processing capabilities. What am I looking at? Unified field equations that our most advanced theoretical physicists have been working on for 3 centuries, she replied, her crystalline features shifting through patterns of frustrated amazement. The humans just transmitted complete solutions to 17 fundamental questions about the nature of space-time, quantum mechanics and dimensional physics. Zekthara studied the equations with growing unease. How is this possible? Their technology suggests they've barely mastered nuclear physics. That's exactly the problem, Commander. Their solutions are correct. We verified them against our most advanced computational systems, but deriving these equations should require technological capabilities that exceed their apparent level by several centuries. Could they have hidden technology? Advanced facilities that our sensors haven't detected? We've mapped every electromagnetic emission on their planet. Their most powerful computational systems are primitive mechanical devices that couldn't solve these equations given 1,000 years of processing time. Yet somehow, they're not only solving them, but doing so faster than our quantum computational matrices. The implications were disturbing beyond Zekthara's previous concerns. A species that could exceed their biological limitations through determination was unprecedented, but comprehensible. A species that could coordinate planetary defense efforts through primitive communication was alarming but theoretically possible. But a species that could solve advanced theoretical physics using primitive technology suggested something far more fundamental. That the hegemony's understanding of the relationship between technology and capability was fundamentally flawed. There's more, Dr. Thesara continued. Yesterday's transmission included detailed specifications for faster-than-light communication systems, not theoretical frameworks. Complete engineering blueprints. Show me. The display shifted to show technical diagrams that were both elegant and sophisticated. Zekthara recognized the principles immediately. They were based on the same quantum entanglement technologies that the hegemony used for instantaneous communication across galactic distances. These designs are more advanced than our current systems, he observed with growing alarm. Significantly more advanced. If these specifications are correct, human communication technology could surpass ours within decades rather than centuries. How long would it take them to build these systems? Based on their current industrial capabilities, approximately 18 months for a basic prototype, 5 years for full implementation. Zekthara sat back in his chair, processing the implications. The hegemony's entire strategic doctrine was based on maintaining technological superiority over less advanced species. They conquered through overwhelming technological advantage, controlled through superior communication and transportation capabilities, and maintained power through carefully managed technological dependence. If humans could leapfrog centuries of technological development through pure theoretical insight, the fundamental assumptions underlying hegemony dominance became questionable. Has there been any response from Hegemony Command to our situation reports? Yes, Commander. Fleet Admiral Cortex is en route with a full battle group. Estimated arrival in 6 standard days. The news was both expected and unwelcome. Cortex was known throughout the hegemony as a brilliant tactical commander with an absolute commitment to military solutions. His arrival would mean that the observation mission was about to become a conquest mission, regardless of what they had learned about human capabilities. Any new intelligence on human activities since the asteroid incident? Their space program has accelerated dramatically. They've launched 17 missions in the past month, including what appears to be construction of a permanent orbital station. More concerning, their industrial coordination hasn't returned to normal patterns. Explain. The level of inter-organizational cooperation they demonstrated during the asteroid crisis appears to have become permanent. Nations that were previously in conflict are now sharing resources freely. Competing corporations are openly collaborating on projects. Their entire global economy seems to be reorganizing around principles of coordinated effort rather than competition. Zekthara found this development more disturbing than their impossible feats of individual strength. Economic and social reorganization at planetary scale suggested planning capabilities that implied humans might be preparing for something. What kind of projects are they coordinating on? Space-based manufacturing, deep-core mining operations, and what appears to be large-scale atmospheric processing equipment. Also, they've begun construction of facilities that serve no apparent purpose according to our analysis.
Unknown purpose facilities? Massive structures being built simultaneously at 17 locations across their planet?
The construction follows no recognizable architectural patterns, serves no apparent industrial function, and requires coordination between multiple nations and thousands of organizations. Show me. The holographic display revealed construction projects that were clearly the result of global coordination. Enormous structures rising from different continents, each one different in design, yet clearly part of a coordinated plan. What's our best analysis of their purpose? Unknown, Commander. The designs don't match any known industrial, military, or scientific applications in our databases. They appear to be built according to specifications that serve purposes we cannot identify. The communication alert interrupted their conversation. Sub-Commander Veltar appeared on the display, his reptilian features showing signs of extreme stress. Commander, we're receiving another transmission from Earth. This one is different. How different? It's being transmitted simultaneously on every communication frequency they've ever used to contact us, and it's being broadcast in perfect hegemony standard, without translation matrices. The implications hit Zekthara immediately. Humans had somehow learned to speak fluent hegemony standard, a language they had never heard and couldn't possibly have deciphered from the minimal communication they'd received. Contents? They're requesting a face-to-face meeting, Commander. They want to send a representative to our position. That's impossible. Their technology doesn't allow for interplanetary travel. Yes, sir. That's what makes their next statement so concerning, which is, they've provided coordinates for a rendezvous point halfway between Earth and our current position. They'll meet us there in 12 hours. Zekthara and Dr. Thessera exchanged glances. The mathematics were simple and terrifying. For humans to reach the proposed coordinates in 12 hours would require faster-than-light travel capabilities that exceeded anything in the hegemony's arsenal. Sir, Veltar continued, there's one more thing. They ended their message with a personal note for you specifically. For me? Yes, Commander. They said, Commander Zekthara, we know you've been trying to understand us. We appreciate your patience and your wisdom in not attempting conquest before gathering information. We think it's time to help you understand what you've been observing. The bridge fell silent. Humans had not only demonstrated faster-than-light capabilities, but had somehow identified Zekthara by name and showed awareness of his decision-making process. How could they possibly know my name? Unknown, sir. We've maintained strict communication silence regarding internal operations. Zekthara stood slowly, his mind racing through possibilities that all led to conclusions he didn't want to reach. Humans had been aware of hegemony observation from the beginning. They had carefully managed what the observers were allowed to see. They had used the asteroid crisis as a demonstration rather than a genuine emergency. And now they were revealing that their apparent technological limitations were as much of an illusion as their apparent physical limitations. Open a channel to the human transmission source, he ordered. Commander, Dr. Thessara protested. We don't know what their true capabilities are. Making direct contact could be extremely dangerous. Doctor, I don't think we have a choice.
They've been managing this entire interaction from the beginning.
We're not observers studying a primitive species. We're guests being allowed to see exactly what our hosts want us to see. The communication channel opened, revealing a human face on the main display. The individual appeared to be a middle-aged female of their species, with features that suggested both intelligence and something approaching amusement. Commander Zekthara, she said in perfect hegemony standard, my name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I represent the Earth Defense Council. We've been waiting for you to be ready for this conversation. Earth Defense Council? We formed it about 6 months before you arrived. We've been expecting visitors from your organization for quite some time. Expecting us? Commander, we've been monitoring hegemony expansion patterns for several decades. Your conquest methodology is quite predictable once you understand the underlying assumptions. We knew you'd eventually reach our system, and we knew you'd conduct reconnaissance before attempting invasion. Zekthara felt a chill that had nothing to do with ship temperature. How long have you been aware of the hegemony's existence? Long enough to prepare appropriate responses. We'd like to invite you to a meeting where we can discuss mutual interests rather than conquest scenarios. You see, Commander, we've been hoping for an opportunity to join the galactic community, but we wanted to do so as equals rather than subjects. You're not technologically advanced enough to qualify for membership. Dr. Chen smiled, and the expression somehow managed to be both friendly and deeply unsettling. Commander, our technology isn't limited by the same assumptions that constrain hegemony development. We'd be happy to explain the differences. But first, would you like to see what your ships look like from down here? The display shifted to show a perfect real-time image of the inevitable conquest from an external perspective, clearly taken from impossibly close range, despite the fact that no human vessels should be capable of reaching their position. We've been watching you watch us, Dr. Rand, Chen continued pleasantly. We thought it was time to introduce ourselves properly. As the implications of the conversation settled over him, Commander Zekthara realized that the hegemony's first contact with humanity was not going to follow any of their established protocols, because humanity had been conducting first contact with the hegemony all along. The meeting chamber aboard the human vessel Harmony defied every assumption Zekthara had formed about human technology during months of observation. The ship itself had appeared at the rendezvous coordinates exactly on schedule, materializing from what appeared to be a controlled spatial fold that suggested mastery of dimensional physics that the hegemony was only beginning to theorize about. Now, sitting across from Dr. Sarah Chen and her delegation in a conference room that somehow felt larger inside than the external dimensions of their ship should have allowed, Commander Zekthara was confronting the reality that humanity's technological capabilities bore no resemblance whatsoever to what his intelligence teams had observed on Earth's surface.
I think we owe you an explanation, Doctor,
Chen said, gesturing to activate a holographic display that showed Earth rotating slowly in the center of the table. What you've been observing on our planet represents approximately 3% of our actual technological capability. 3%? Zekthara's mandibles clicked in disbelief. We learned long ago that displaying advanced technology openly tends to attract unwanted attention from aggressive spacefaring civilizations, explained Dr. James Park, the human delegation's military representative. So we developed what we call surface culture, a fully functional but technologically limited civilization that allows us to develop normally while keeping our true capabilities hidden. Dr. Thesara, who had accompanied Zek Thara to the meeting, leaned forward with obvious fascination. You maintain an entire false civilization to deceive potential invaders? Not false, corrected Dr. Chen. Every human on Earth lives a genuine life within the technological parameters they believe represent the limits of our development. They just don't know that those limits are artificially maintained for security purposes. The impossible feats we observed, individuals exceeding their biological limitations, represent the intersection between our surface culture and our actual capabilities, Dr. Park continued. When humans are sufficiently motivated, particularly by threats to others, they unconsciously access enhanced capabilities that we've integrated into our biology. They don't realize they're using advanced technology. They think they're just being heroic. Zek Thara processed this information with growing amazement and concern. You've augmented your entire species? Enhanced, not augmented, Dr. Chen clarified. Every human born in the last century carries genetic modifications that allow them to temporarily access improved physical capabilities, accelerated healing, enhanced cognitive processing, and limited psionic abilities. But the enhancements only activate under specific emotional and situational triggers. The asteroid deflection was indeed a real crisis that required genuine planetary coordination, but our people managed it so effectively because they were unconsciously accessing collective intelligence capabilities that allow 8 billion individuals to function as a single coordinated organism when necessary. Dr. Thesara's crystalline form was cycling through colors that indicated profound scientific excitement. You've solved the collective consciousness integration problem that our best cognitive scientists consider theoretically impossible. We approached it differently than most species, Dr. Park explained. Instead of trying to create artificial collective consciousness, we enhanced natural human empathy and social bonding to allow spontaneous coordination under crisis conditions. It's not telepathy or hive mind control, it's amplified emotional intelligence that allows perfect cooperation when survival demands it. But the technical solutions you transmitted, the faster-than-light communication, the advanced physics, Commander, Dr. Chen said with a gentle smile. We've had faster-than-light travel for 60 years. Dimensional manipulation for 40 years, and practical immortality for 20 years. What we transmitted to you represents technology that we consider basic industrial applications. The implications were staggering. Humanity wasn't a primitive species that occasionally exceeded their limitations. They were a technologically advanced civilization that had deliberately hidden their capabilities while allowing the hegemony to observe a carefully constructed illusion of primitiveness. Why? Zek Thara asked finally. Why reveal this now? Because we've been studying the hegemony just as carefully as you've been studying us, Dr. Booby. Park replied. Your expansion pattern, your conquest methodology, your technological capabilities, and your political structure. We've been preparing for this conversation for decades. Preparing for what? Dr. Chen manipulated the holographic display to show star maps that depicted the entire known galaxy, with hegemony territory marked in red, and vast areas of unexplored space marked in blue. Commander, the hegemony controls approximately 12% of known galactic space, but our surveys indicate that there are civilizations in the unexplored regions that make the hegemony look primitive by comparison. Some of them are aggressively expansionist. Some of them consider other sentient species to be resources rather than potential allies. You're suggesting that the hegemony faces external threats? We're stating that the galaxy is far more dangerous than your civilization realizes. The only reason these advanced species haven't moved into hegemony space is because they're currently engaged in conflicts with other entities that exist on scales your current technology couldn't even perceive. Doctor. Park stood and walked to the display, pointing to regions of space that hegemony maps marked as unexplored. 3 months ago, an entire star system in this region simply disappeared. Not destroyed, removed from space-time entirely. 2 weeks ago, we detected what appeared to be a galaxy-sized artificial construct moving through intergalactic space. It's heading in this direction. Are you trying to frighten us into alliance? We're trying to offer you partnership in mutual survival, Dr. Chen replied. Humanity has advanced capabilities, but we're a single species on one planet. The hegemony has inferior technology, but vastly superior resources and population. Working together, we might be able to develop the capabilities needed to survive what's coming. Zekthara studied the star maps with growing unease. If humans were correct about advanced threats in unexplored space, the hegemony's expansion strategy might have been inadvertently preparing them for conflicts they couldn't imagine. What kind of partnership are you proposing? Technology sharing, resource coordination, and defensive preparation, Dr. Park outlined. We help you upgrade your technology base. You provide industrial capacity and population for large-scale defensive projects. Together, we prepare for contact with entities that consider both our civilizations to be insignificant. And if we refuse? Dr. Chen's expression remained friendly, but something in her tone suggested depths of capability that Zekthara was only beginning to appreciate. Then humanity will continue developing independently, the hegemony will continue expanding according to current patterns, and when the real threats arrive, we'll all face them separately with whatever capabilities we've managed to develop in isolation. You could simply conquer the hegemony directly. Your technology appears superior to ours. Commander? Doctor, Chen said with genuine sadness. Conquest is what brought the galaxy's current dangers into existence. Species that solve problems through force eventually encounter species that are better at force. We're hoping to break that cycle by building alliances based on mutual benefit rather than dominance. Tessera leaned forward with obvious excitement. What you're proposing could advance hegemony science by centuries. The theoretical implications alone would require completely restructuring how your civilization approaches technology development. Dr. Park agreed. We're not just offering specific technologies. We're offering entirely different approaches to understanding physics, consciousness, and the nature of intelligence itself. Zekthara stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at space that suddenly seemed far more vast and dangerous than it had an hour earlier. For 30 years, he had conquered worlds by understanding their capabilities and applying overwhelming force at their weakest points. The simple mathematics of technological superiority had never failed, but now he was facing a species that had turned that entire approach into an elaborate game of misdirection while preparing for threats that could render both their civilizations irrelevant. I'll need to discuss this with Hegemony Command. Of course, Doctor, Chen replied. But Commander, I should mention that Fleet Admiral Cortex's battle group will be arriving in your system in approximately 4 days. We'd prefer to conclude these discussions before he decides that conquest is a viable option. How do you know about Cortex? We've been monitoring hegemony communications for decades. We know his reputation, his tactical preferences, and his probable response to the situation reports you've been sending. He's an excellent military commander, but he's operating under assumptions about human capabilities that are approximately 97% incorrect. Zekthara felt a chill that had nothing to do with ship temperature. What would happen if he attempted to attack Earth? Dr. Park and Dr. Chen exchanged glances that conveyed layers of communication beyond Zekthara's ability to interpret. Commander, Dr. Chen said carefully, humanity has spent 60 years preparing for the possibility of hostile first contact. If forced to defend ourselves, we would do so effectively. But military conflict between our civilizations would weaken both of us for the real challenges ahead. You're confident you could defeat a hegemony battle group? We're confident that military conflict would be a tragic waste of resources that both our civilizations will need for survival. The subtle threat was clear. Humanity could defend themselves against hegemony military force, but they preferred cooperation to conflict. What specific technologies would you be willing to share? Everything, Doctor. Chen replied without hesitation. Faster-than-light communication and travel, dimensional manipulation, collective consciousness interfaces, biological enhancement, advanced artificial intelligence, and manufacturing techniques that could build Dyson spheres around entire star systems. In exchange for partnership in preparing for threats that neither of us can face alone, and a commitment to expansion through alliance rather than conquest. Zekthara turned back to face the human delegation. For the first time in his military career, he was contemplating recommending that the hegemony abandon conquest in favor of cooperation. I'll need guarantees about human intentions. You'll have them. But more importantly, you'll have evidence. We're prepared to begin technology transfer immediately as a demonstration of good faith. Doctor, Chen manipulated the holographic display to show technical specifications that made even Zekthara's advanced tactical mind struggle to comprehend the implications. This is a basic faster-than-light communication array that can be integrated with your existing systems. Complete specifications, manufacturing instructions, and installation protocols. Consider it a gift to demonstrate our sincerity. Why are you trusting us with this? Because, Commander, we've been studying the hegemony for decades. You're conquerors, but you're not destroyers. You prefer to integrate rather than eliminate. That makes you potential partners rather than inevitable enemies. As Zekthara studied the technical specifications that could revolutionize hegemony communication capabilities, he realized that humanity had just accomplished something that no species in known galactic history had ever achieved. They had convinced a hegemony commander to consider alliance instead of conquest, and they had done it by demonstrating that cooperation could be more powerful than domination. "I'll recommend partnership to Hegemony Command," he said finally. Dr. Chen smiled, and for the first time the expression carried no hidden depths or unsettling implications. "Commander, I think this is the beginning of a very interesting friendship." Outside the viewport, the stars continued their ancient dance, unaware that two civilizations had just taken the first steps toward an alliance that might reshape the entire galaxy, or at least help them survive whatever was coming next.